So you are in supporting our learners on the job during interesting times. My name is Joy Payton. I use she, her pronouns. And I, along with Ray Balise, who is also on this panel, and Beth Atkinson, who is moderating this panel or is as one of our helpers today, we are on the organizing committee of R Medicine. And we're really grateful to all of you for being here today. And we hope we're having a good time at R Medicine. And we're really enthusiastic and looking forward to hearing all your feedback about how the conference is going. So please do, in the main panel there, just let us know what you're liking, what you're enjoying, what you'd like to see next year, and consider what you'd like to contribute next year as far as a talk. If something that you've seen this year has been enthusiastic and made you think about what you'd like to contribute, we'd like to invite you to consider submitting a talk next year for our medicine. So today I convened a panel of our educators today to talk about some of the things that we're all dealing with in these interesting times. And I want to make sure that you have access to these slides and can use them and navigate through them now if you choose, or in the future. So this first slide, in case you want to look at the slide where we list our favorite resources, this slide will help you sort of navigate through this Quarto slide deck. You can see our speaker notes, you can see how to navigate through that, and the link to the slides is in the chat. So that's what this first slide is for. So I convened this panel, and I brought together some people whose work I admire and whose opinions I think are really valuable. And I'm a data science educator in biomedicine. And I wanted to bring together other educators who work in different areas of the same field to talk about a topic I think a lot of us care about, which is how to support people who are trying to acquire skills around using R. And a lot of times people who are trying to acquire R skills are busy doing lots of other things at the same time. And we're trying to do that in what I have euphemistically called interesting times. This is a time in our history which is very cognitively taxing. At least it is for me. I will let the other speakers and panelists describe how they are navigating these times in their own words. So I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves and describe what their primary educational audiences are, and I'll do that in alphabetical order by last name. So we'll go through, I'll invite each panelist to introduce themselves, and then I'll start by asking just a couple of starting questions. And then I would really love to open it up to you, to our audience, to our participants, to our fellow educators, to engage with us and really make this a dialogue. So with that, let's get started with our first panelist, Ray.
Howdy, folks. So I am Ray Balise. I've been teaching biostatistics and data science before there was a thing called data science. So I was at Stanford for, I don't know, 15, 17 years, teaching what I was then calling statistical programming. And so my background, I have a PhD in experimental psychology, but I was brought on board to work on statistical genetics and do all kinds of analyses because I love to program. And so there, I helped draft a qualifying exam for PhD students in biostatistics. And I, at the time, was working on statistical genetics of prostate cancer. And so I thought, wouldn't it be fun if I built a data set, a family tree data set on prostate cancer, and I gave some of the women prostate cancer. And then as, you know, I made this into a really, really hard survival analysis problem. And the correct answer was supposed to be, excuse me, sir, excuse me, Dr. Balise, there's a whole bunch of women with prostate cancer I need to stop. And instead I got brilliant mathematical work, you know, to deal with the complicated genetics and all of this. So anyway, at the beginning of time, for me, it's always been about, can I teach smart people how to think about data? And so I've been teaching statistical computing for, I don't know, 25 years now. So in biostatistics at Stanford and now at the University of Miami, I work on asynchronous and synchronous classes. But it all, for me, it starts with, let's forget about the math for a minute and think about reality and science and data. So that's me.
Thank you. Silvia.
Hi, everybody. My name is Silvia Canelón, and I work at Penn in Philadelphia. I work at the Center for Health Justice. I'm also an independent data journalist more recently. I have formal training in biomedical engineering. That's what I went to undergrad and graduate school for. But in those roles, I didn't work with large data sets very much. I was working in a cell culture lab and wanted to shift to work with data. So that's what I did 6 years ago, and which is where I started learning about R, and CHOP really took me under their wing when I was learning. There were so many different workshops that I was able to attend and lots of resources that I benefited from. But that's how I learned. R was really on the job through code snippets shared by my mentor at the time, and in these kind of more structured workshops. And right now I use biomedical and spatial data science in a clinical research setting. We look at urban nature and health outcomes. And I'm also on the side working on an accountability journalism project. So stay tuned. I will share more about that when it's ready. And then generally speaking, I'm really passionate about data literacy, communication, and accessibility. I think, how we present the data is just as important as what we do with it. And I know lots of folks on the panel, if not everybody, kind of agrees with the importance of these things. And for me, education has mostly in the past looked like informal mentorship of colleagues. I've also helped as a TA for different conferences like this one. And I've taught some Our Ladies workshops as well. So that's a variety in different contexts. And then lately it's been mostly informal education mentorship to folks in my immediate orbits.
Thank you. Meghan.
I feel like I can just copy everything Sylvia said because like that's my background too. So right now I'm currently a data scientist at the PCCCC, which is a part of Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, where we focus on prostate cancer and things like that. I also learned R and dove into the world of data science about 6 years ago. Before that, I was actually an environmental chemist working for my local county government in wastewater management. I know it's such a shift, but I decided to go back to school. I got my master's in public health and epidemiology with a concentration of psychiatric epidemiology. And while I was doing that, I realized I liked data. And then like after I got my degree and went out into the real world, I was just like, I like programming. So that's kind of how I flowed into data science. So I'm not a formal educator. I always argue that because I am self-taught, a lot of my learning is actually like learning how to teach myself. And as a byproduct of that, I have started, branching out and doing talks, doing like how-to articles. I'm actually an active mentor at the school that I went to and got my degree right now for public health students and data science students as well. And I don't know. I don't know. I think that this is a good topic to talk about. And I don't know. I'm always a little like wary about like how much can I really say because I'm self-taught. Like I don't know. I just want people to like understand that like regardless of the path that you took to get here, that like education in this matter is important and that you can absolutely contribute to something. So yeah.
Excellent. Ted.
Yep. Hi. So I forgot to put my job title on here. Well, actually I did. Sorry, I'm not good at reading my own slide. So I'm the Director of Training and Community for the Office of the Chief Data Officer at Fred Hutch Cancer Center. That's a mouthful, but part of our job at the Office of Chief Data Officer is we're trying to change data culture there, and I do a lot of teaching, and whether it be in workshop form or long form course workshops. I've worked with a lot of different kinds of learners. I gave a talk here at R Medicine a few years ago called the MD and RMD. So really about teaching clinicians and how they are a very special phenotype. But I feel like half of my job in academia as an advisor was basically helping people restructure their talks and PowerPoints to make it more digestible. And if there's two things that I've basically made my career on, it is cognitive load theory, managing people's, everyone is just so overloaded with information. How do we manage that? And psychological safety. So really, I just believe it's just so important for people to have a safe environment to learn and ask questions, because that's how we grow. That's it.
Excellent. And I put myself last because I'm last in the alphabet, but also because I wanted to put myself last because I love picking out of everybody's wealth. I'm Joy. I'm actually in transition mode, which we'll talk about later when I talk about my interesting times. But while at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which you'll hear me call CHOP, Sylvia also referred to CHOP, some of what I have done has been to teach lots of different kinds of data science, R, Python, SQL, machine learning, NLP, AI, all sorts of different things to lots of different kinds of people, clinicians, MD fellows, folks up and down the sort of lab staff stack. I also work in global health informatics, which it's really important to me. I think there's a lot of decolonization work that we have to do there. There's a big data extractive economy at play that I want to ameliorate. I think there's a lot to fix there. I occasionally pick up a side gig doing adjunct work or lecturing for O'Reilly. And then some of my side interests include working with data from the criminal legal system. So in Pennsylvania, we elect our judges, but those races are typically very low information. But that information, especially around criminal court, is public. And so one of my sort of passions is to sort of make that what is hidden a little bit more available for voters so that people can vote their conscience around the criminal legal system. So that's our panel. And I already see some activity in the in chat. I think there's a lot. Please, everyone, just jump in. Like, this is a conversation. I picked a bunch of different people who I think have some authority in this field, but I think everyone in this room has authority because we are all learners. And because we are all learners, we have authority around what it means to educate and what it means to teach. And we know what it's like to be taught well, and we know what it's like to be taught in a way that doesn't respect us. And so we all have a lot to say. So please just jump into chat and let's make this a conversation. So with that, I have a couple of starter questions. And if we go completely off these, fantastic. If the chat, jumps into gear and we forget these planted questions, that's fine too. But let's start with this question one. So vibe coding or using LLMs to write code is enjoying a lot of press these days. I certainly have asked, ChatGPT, hey, how do I do this thing in Python? So is it still necessary to teach people how to write R code? Do we still need to do this? And if so, how much? So I will open it up to the panel to come off mute at your leisure.
Do you want to hear the cantankerous response?
Please.
Actually, I've been really thinking about this because I think it is it's a Pandora's box. We can't go back to times before LLMs. And honestly, one of the things I was having, like, there was a discussion about LLMs, and really, I think one of the issues with learning LLMs is they kind of interfere with your ability to learn the mental models that like actually help you understand and how to put the information together. So in general, like for our intro courses, we kind of discourage it. But that's not to say that it doesn't have like uses. So I know that's a spicy take. So I'd love to hear what everybody else thinks.
So I agree. Um, so just for like some background, I think maybe this year, actually started like looking at AI. I went that long without using AI at all. Um, but I've always told people that I feel like if you are going to decide to use AI, I feel like its best use would be for somebody who is not a beginner, like not a complete beginner at all. Because the way that I always describe it, I'm just like, you can let AI ride along in the car with you, but you shouldn't let it drive. It can be a passenger princess, but like you have to have that understanding of what it is that you're doing. And I think that beginners, they might know what they want an end result to look like, but they might not truly understand what it is that they actually need to do. So I feel like, Ted, like what you were saying about like having that mental model, like I feel like you only can really develop that once you're actually putting in that work to learn it yourself without like AI. So I agree with you. I don't know if that's a hot take either.
And from my spin, it's not a matter of if, but how. So I've got decades of experience, and I tend to work with an AI called Claude, and I asked Claude to generate a graphic for me, a really complicated, hard ggplot, and it did something wrong. And I asked it to debug it over and over and over again. And eventually I was leaning on all of my ggplot knowledge to ask it the right questions so that I could see what was actually going wrong. So in my head, LLMs are fantastic because they lighten, you don't need to memorize where the comma goes. You don't need to memorize the syntax. But what I think needs to happen is we now need to start teaching with LLMs, as in teaching, for those of you who've done ggplot, there's a series of things, you specify the data set, you specify some abstract stuff, and then you say, throw in this kind of plot. All of that can be worked into instruction. So you can teach the thought process for using ggplot, but task out the syntax to the LLMs so that, again, you don't have to sweat what's the name of the argument for, some part of ggplot, which maybe Hadley only remembers. So as everybody said, there's no turning back. But I think the really interesting question is, how do we develop curriculum or instruction so that people can learn to code with LLMs?
Yeah, I had an interesting experience. Last year, I led a workshop on machine learning and AI for physicians. And it was in Panama, and I was conducting it in Spanish. So it was interesting for me because I was using AI also to like polish my Spanish because I'm not a native Spanish speaker. And so, so I wrote all my notes, and then I used AI to sort of like polish it and just be like, do my nouns and verbs agree? Did I get the gender right? All that good stuff. And so what I did is I showed people sort of the steps of machine learning, talk about preparing the data, centering and normalizing the data, doing a test set and a training set, and sort of explaining why, and just doing it kind of the hard way first, and then walking through creating a really good prompt, right? And so we used Gemini because we were using Colab notebooks, right? And so there's a little sidekick that you can use, Google's Gemini AI agent there. And so I said, all right, so we know what we have to do. So let's ask it what we need to do. And let's be very precise. Can you help me, center and scale this data, right? Can you help me, can you use sklearn? Let me name the package I want it to use and do a support vector machine. And so sort of giving them first, this is what we have to do, and then saying, now that you know what we have to do, let's design the prompt. And so I like the idea of using it as a teaching tool. But what was interesting was the code came out really good, and Google Gemini works pretty well in Spanish as well, including commenting it in Spanish and all the rest. But there were a few really interesting errors, like there was label reversal. There was a 180-degree yes and no label reversal. And I said, look, the problem with this is not that it doesn't work, it's that it works and it looks real good, right? So teaching people like what are the errors to look for, I think is really important.
I think that's super important, and you actually just like jogged my memory. So Ray, I actually also use Claude. I love Claude, and I've had things where I knew what I wanted like my output to look like. So I'd literally like make the prompt, and then I would like make like a test dummy Tibble that like has the actual data. Like this is what I want, and a lot of times it works really well, but sometimes Claude will say like, oh, use this function from this package. And like you believe it at face value because you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But then you go and do it and it's just like, oh, that is not in the namespace because it's not an actual function in the package. Yep. So to me, like like being a little bit more experienced, I see the name of the function that it thought existed. And using that, I actually like did the mental work myself to be like, I kind of see where you were trying to go with that. So like, let me go and do it on my own. So I've actually gotten help from AI in that like manner too. And that's, I don't think that that's something that someone who's just starting out would be like prepared to do. So I think that's an interesting thing to like think about, like how would we teach interacting with LLMs? How would we teach how to craft the perfect prompt? I think those are good things to explore.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what folks were sharing. I think for me, I'm more like Megan, just very resistant. I still haven't used it without. I guess I would say I haven't used it in coding, but if there's a documentation website that uses an AI agent, then I'll use that. But yeah, I think I'm going to try to touch on some things that maybe haven't been covered yet. I think when it comes to debugging, I think that is a really useful skill. And I think that is a place where like the linguistic part of it matters, right? For you to know if there's a period that goes there, there's a comma that goes there, semicolon. I think those things, I have found them to be helpful things to learn over my journey. And it's something that I see a lot in beginner workshops, like whether it's been me as a beginner learning or whether it's been me as a TA, is like learning to debug when things aren't going well is a very useful skill. And I think my biggest concern really is skill atrophy. And yeah, and so I think that those like minute things that could get off-sourced are still useful things to learn. And I also, for myself, and I know several folks on the panel have also maybe approached learning like this, but in community, I think for me, one of the really wonderful things about learning R is the R community. And I've learned so much from other people's code snippets, other people's like tweets, other people's like Slack, like help me channel responses. You know, there's a lot of learning that for me has happened in a community context, and it's been through that one-on-one interaction with other people, even if I don't know them, even if they're strangers on the internet. And I think that that is also super valuable, and I would never want to sacrifice that for speed or Yeah, I wouldn't want to, I guess, exclusively rely on an AI tool where I enjoy kind of like the one-on-one interaction pieces. And I think as an educator, I think those of us here, kind of like most people have said already, is we have a foundational understanding of coding and of R, and we are able to use that foundational knowledge to help other people learn or help debug or what have you. But there's others, right, that'll come after us that are like learning, like the folks that are learning now to really rely a lot on AI tools, who then might want to teach. Like I really wonder about what that's going to look like. So yeah, those are the thoughts that come to mind.
So
I love.
oh, go ahead, Ray.
I was just going to comment. I love that Beth put a comment in chat about how it's like learning how to use Google. And, you know, you can ask an AI question and you'll get an answer, just like you can ask Google a question. But if you know how to use Google properly and put in all kinds of restrictions, you can go really far. And so part of what I think needs to happen is we need to be teaching prompt engineering. In my world, I'm trying to teach other faculty that LLMs are not cheating. While they can be used to cheat, I'm deeply concerned about the faculty who are discouraging the use of LLMs, because I know students are going to graduate, they're going to use them, and I don't want them to get fired from their new jobs because they weren't taught how to use them properly. And so I'm deeply concerned about that. And so I'm agitating loudly that we actually we have structured instruction on how to use LLMs, how to write the right questions. All of the issues that people raised about AI returning really correct looking non-existent functions. I think everybody here has been there, but students need to have that experience when we're looking over their shoulder and we can pull them back. Because otherwise I've seen it over and over again where students, they get a non-existent function and then they think they did something wrong. And it's
Ray, are you saying that abstinence only education doesn't work?
It's an interesting choice.
Well, speaking of interesting, and Ted, I'll let you answer, but it may also float into this, which is interesting times. So feel free to answer about AI or transition into what is making your life as an educator particularly interesting.
Okay. Like I just like to interject opinions sometimes. But building on what Ray was talking about, integrating like AI into assignments. I just gave a talk for Fred Hutch participants, and one of the things was I snuck in software engineering and like talking about how do you actually know what it's doing is correct. So I like, you know, Megan mentioned like don't let AI drive. I think Microsoft also says don't let Copilot fly the plane. But I think being the manager of your AI, like that's kind of the way I've started thinking about it, is that it's a very smart but uninformed contributor. So you do have to validate. Um, uh, I guess I'll just segue into interesting times. Yeah, I'll just be honest, like, you know, a lot of our learners are like the funding situation is very precarious. So, you know, we're really trying to support them as best we can. And I think part of that is, again, like managing cognitive load and, you know, really making sure that people get what they want to get out of a course. Just really asking a lot of questions, expressing concern, trying to take care of people.
I agree that it's a very scary time for a lot of our constituencies. You know, I think for those, you know, for those of us who are working in the United States right now, which I think everyone on the panel is based in the United States, funding for research and also for clinical work is under threat right now. And so the interesting times that I'm experiencing right now include having my entire team shut down. So, I began a data science education team in the Research Institute at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia in 2017. Really started data literacy at my organization, but the funding for research has been threatened. We know that F&A, facilities and administration, charges have been threatened by the existing administration. We don't know what's going to happen with Medicaid. That's very scary for pediatric medicine, especially in a city, a majority minority city like Philadelphia, where I live. And so as a result of all this, my hospital reluctantly had to undertake layoffs. And so my team was affected. And so, hi, this is a shameless plug for, I launched this panel not knowing that my interesting times would include the fact that, education right now is unfortunately under fire, right? And if we look at the NSF and what's happening with the National Science Foundation and what's happening with their grants, it's disproportionately educational programs that are getting culled. And so, so this is a personal plea. If you're looking for an educator, I know a few. I am one. But definitely, this is a hard time for folks, for our researchers, for our clinicians, for our patient families. This is cognitively taxing. And, a few of us have talked about how much we need to build up our learners. We teach technology, but we also teach robustness to failure. We teach how to deal with error codes and imposter syndrome and feeling like you don't belong and you're not good at this and this is too hard. All of that care is so important right now.
I'll jump in here. So my interesting times, I'll knock on some wood. My job is still safe, because I do work in the clinical research field. But the interesting times I've been seeing is actually with my undergraduate students that I mentor. A lot of them are getting their degree in public health right now. And it used to be that the be all end all was CDC. And now it's just so it's kind of shifted the conversations a bit of okay, what else can I do with these skills? So there's a lot of discussion about the transferring of the skills between different industries. So I don't know. I don't know, it just expends a lot of energy because, at first it's you want to just get through your degree and you don't want to have to worry about if you're profitable to somebody after you get out of school. But now the conversations are kind of shifting towards that of okay, what is my plan B and plan C for when I'm done with school? Interesting.
I guess I can go next. Yes, I can definitely relate to what's been shared, concerns about funding, feeling relatively safe for now, knock on wood. And I think when I think about interesting times, a lot of what comes to mind too is folks who haven't yet learned to code or haven't yet learned how to work with data, and having that be a skill set that I wouldn't say I nudge it, but I'll suggest it if folks are kind of inclined in that direction, because I do think it can open up doors in different areas. I think one of the really wonderful things about having data skills is that there's data of all kinds. If you have to switch domains, you're able to do that with data skills. They are very transferable, like Megan was saying. And I think one example that comes to mind too is I've talked to a lot of folks in journalism really concerned about their roles as well. And lots of folks who maybe weren't trained to use data in journalism as much are trying to pick up some more of those skills to either potentially a little bit more job security, but also to shift into a totally different role if they need to, that's adjacent. So those are the kind of things that come to mind.
Another interesting time for me is, what is the role of R, which is probably sacrilege in this conference. I love Julia. I'm terrible at Python. I'm I've been a huge fan of RStudio and Posit. But as I'm watching complementary sets of tools get rolled out, I'm in an interesting spot as an educator. What should I be teaching? Because I know the correct answer is everything, but the reality is, so I've been teaching SAS since the beginning of time, and trying to teach SAS and R in a semester means students are not very good at either. And so then what do you do? And so then that gets balanced against just how many programming classes can I put into a biostat degree? How about an MPH degree? How about the medical school curricula? And so it's an interesting problem for me, trying to figure out how to balance the different toolkits that are out there. And I don't have a good answer. I'd love the other panelists to give me an answer to this. Because again, I find trying to teach multiple languages in a semester is a mistake. But having students walk out the door with no Python experience seems like a mistake. And again, I love Julia, and so I'd love to let students see why. So that's another interesting time. Is for the longest time, R was the Wild West, and it was constantly this package versus that package, blah 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 blah. But now it is the Wild West of now spoken in different languages. So.
I don't have any suggestions, but that did like pop a question in my head. Like, I wonder if it makes sense to have like I keep wanting to say intro to coding, but like that's not exactly what I'm thinking of. Like teaching the foundations of just like coding itself. I mean, because even if you are, agnostic to whatever different languages, there are some concepts, that you have to understand being a programmer or a data scientist or whatever. I don't know where to even start with that, but I wonder if like taking a more general approach like that at first, and then kind of like trying to introduce different languages within the degree, like if that would help. That's my spitball.
Yeah, I mean, what we do at the Hutch is actually we have two equivalent sets of courses. So basically R and Python, they actually teach the identical content. It's just like, the language. So that's kind of how we have been kind of trying to tackle this. I don't know if that's a great suggestion.
I'd love to pause and see if there's questions from our attendees that they would like to ask. I have another canned question or two, but would love to see if there's other questions that folks would like to pose. And you can drop them in chat or come off mute. I'm one of those inveterate extroverts who like struggles with quiet. So I'm going to wait just one more moment and see if there's a question. There's some great conversation in chat though about teaching multiple language, bilingual. Here's a great comment. In our data science concentration in PH program, the introduction to computer programming for public health is bilingual, R and Python. We thought teaching two ways would help build those mental models, but in practice, we see students focus on one or the other. Would love to hear examples where this, presumably sort of a bimodal model, works well.
And I've been trying that for years, and I can't find a way to get it to work. Somebody else in chat made a comment about there's universals in computer science. So once students start to think about like if else, an if else statement in SAS versus R versus Python, come on, they're not that different. But the cognitive load of trying to remember the syntax of if else in one language versus another is real. It's like if you're an English speaker, enjoy learning Italian and Spanish at the same time. The conflicts, for me anyway, those overwhelm the benefits of getting the universal concepts. So to response to the person in chat, yeah, I wish I knew how to do that. I wish I could teach with 2 languages, but again, the cognitive load is just overwhelming, even for very, very smart people.
I think for me, when people say, what language should I use? I say, what language does your lab use? What language do the people around you who will help you use? That's the language you should use. And if you're a sole practitioner and no one will help you, then I say, are you a point and click person? Are you coming from Excel, or do you have a history of programming? If you're used to using Excel, I usually push people towards R because it has structures and a look and feel that will be more comfortable for them. And if they've done some programming in the past, I push them in the direction of Python, don't tell. So I think, so much depends on people's personalities, because I don't, and the whole like R or Python, I think is such a silly, ridiculous. They're both completely adequate. There is no R or Python. It used to be, R is a memory hog and is terrible for like really big data sets. And there's like ways around that. It used to be like you can't do big NLP in R, or you can't do big machine learning in R. That's not true anymore. It's what do you like? What do you like?
I mean, one way we do this, we try to integrate like languages, like we try to do like language agnostic events. So one thing we've been doing are datathons. So we pick a data set, we provide people like enough information to get started, and we're like, use whatever language you want. And it's been interesting because, it's been about 50-50, like in terms of participation, in terms of R, Python. So I think part of it is just like, I always feel like people, it's not, once you pick up one language and you kind of know the basics, you can move over. And that feeling of, oh, I chose wrong is kind of, I feel like that's really not a helpful way to think of it.
All right, I'm going to advance to the next question just because it is something that we talked about a little bit, which is skill retention. I definitely have had the experience of teaching an R workshop and then people walk away, they don't use it. They didn't install R, they used posit.cloud. They didn't install R on their system. They use Excel or GraphPad or whatever in their daily, workflow, and they don't learn, they don't use those skills, and they rust. So how do you panelists find, what do you find useful for helping people actually apply and retain skills?
I can speak on that a little bit. So when I am talking with people that are also professionals, so not undergraduate students, and they want to learn how to code in R, one of the first suggestions I give them is, are there any opportunities at the position that you're in now to introduce R into your work? And I'm a little biased because that's how I learned. You know, I was working somewhere 6 years ago that I wasn't really a fan of, and I saw an opportunity to learn how to use R so that I could get another job. And I was able to do that. And that was, you know, I don't know, like, because my first language was SAS, you know, in grad school. And then I didn't remember it at all. But then when I started like working itself, it's like, okay, I try to like be like, I'm gonna make a Shiny app, like without even knowing how to like load data into R. It wasn't until I was prompted with like a reason to learn. So I always say that. I always say like, if you can integrate it into work that you're already doing, cool. If you don't work in a position like that, what are you into? Because the cool thing about data is that you can do a lot with it. You can, you know, make a little like side project for like, I don't know, like your plants, and you can do art, and you can do all this other fun stuff that you care about. I think that kind of will help to give that little motivation of like, you know, learning and retaining it. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I'll hop on. I definitely agree that like having something, yeah, something that you're interested in as the like the shiny light at the end, I think can be really effective. Having some project can be really motivating. I'll say for myself, in working in clinical research, the projects that I had worked on or have worked on aren't, because the data is not available publicly, then it's not like immediately public facing. And so I think trying to find projects where you can showcase the same skills, but with a public data set can be really rewarding because you're building a portfolio alongside the work that you're doing. And then if you want to use that portfolio to leverage for another position, like Meghan was talking about, you could do that. What else? I feel like I had another point. Tools and methods. Well, I'll stop here. I'll pipe in if I remember.
I think building on what everyone has said, I mean, it's really practice and doing it over and over again. Is like that's like the way to kind of solidify things, like cognitive psychology has kind of shown this. So I think one of the underrated things is when I see like people are curious about like data science, or there's a particular problem. I think I'm just recapitulating what Meghan has said basically, but um, you try to encourage that. And like, one way we've done that is we look at data sets we have had no experience with. Like, I put an example of the datathon in the chat, and one of the things we do not do spatial work. So it was an opportunity for us to learn. So, everyone was kind of learning with us.
And then I'll also say, Meghan, that just hit the square and that hit the nail on the head. The only thing I'll add to it for me as somebody who's been teaching for a while is trying to find, teaching in academic settings for a while, is trying to find a data set that students will study for fun. Okay. So when you take a stat class, when I had stat classes, I get handed some stupid soil. Sorry for anybody who loves geology or whatever, but I would get a soil data set, and it's just like, I don't care. And so for me, I've had the good fortune of working on all kinds of projects, and so I find something that has to do with sexually transmitted diseases because students are going to get interested in that data. Or I look at addiction because students will get interested in that. And I've always wanted to find a data set on hearing loss so that we can do sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But it's find a data set so that students can learn the data and get comfortable with it if they don't have their own. Because otherwise you spend time remembering the data, remembering the syntax, remembering the programming concepts. So if I can get students to understand a data set first it like frees up some of their resources so that they can focus on the data, or they can focus on the programming or the math rather than trying to remember what does variable x1 mean. So find meaningful things for a person. Sounds bad, but I got a lot of good grades, but I didn't learn a damn thing until I started to work on my own data. When it's your own, it gets really easy to learn.
Exactly. Well, Matt shared a great resource in chat, and that brings me, because we're close to the end, I do want to give the panelists a chance to talk about some of their favorite resources. I'm gonna, we can just, you know what, I'm gonna jump in and start at the bottom because I put mine at the bottom. So I want to talk about some of these things that I popped in, and then panelists, you can sort of talk about your favorite resources. So I put in the 3 at the bottom. DENT is the Data Education Navigator tool. That's a bunch of resources that I and my team put together, and it still exists, and I think it'll exist for a while. So like, go check it out. These are asynchronous modules that are about everything from R, Python, regex, machine learning, LLMs. They're all asynchronous modules that are intended for sort of biomedical research. So they're really titrated for that use case. And they're all built using LeaScript, which is the next bullet. And LeaScript is a markdown renderer. So it allows you to write educational resources just using Markdown, and it makes them into really pretty paginated educational documents where you can run code, you can have quizzes, you can do all sorts of stuff. And this is a free open source resource that I really, really love. Teaching Tech Together has been around for a few years. A number of us super love it and are like super big fan people of Greg Wilson. If you don't know Greg Wilson, you need to know him. And that's all I'll say. And I'll hand it off to the others to talk about theirs.
I can hop in with the ones above yours, Joy. Big Book of R I put in there above DENT. It's one of my favorite resources to share with other people because you've probably come across some kind of R book on your learning journey, and like a publicly available website that is like an online book talking about some kind of specific R topic. And there's so many out there. So Big Book of R is a project that brings together as many of these books as this person is aware of, the maintainer is aware of. So it's a great place to try to find resources that you need for your project. I also linked to R Open Sci trainings. R Open Sci is a group that does a lot of really great work around R package development, among other things, but R package development is one of their strengths. They have different trainings of videos available on their website, and they focus a lot on research as opposed to like private sector contexts, which can be helpful. I linked to the R Ladies YouTube channel, which is where I learned a lot of different things because folks volunteer their time to teach on topics that they're interested in. And then the last one I linked here is the Urban Institute's Do No Harm project. This is a series of resources about considerations to make when you're communicating data. And there's a guide on considerations for equity and data visualizations, for example. There's another guide all about accessibility. So you have several guides, and I refer to them a lot when I'm creating data visualizations and just when I'm thinking through my data pipeline process as well.
And I think mine are the ones at the top. Anything that Julia Silge does, I will watch over and over again. If you don't know her blog, oh, you've missed out. Brilliant educator. If you want to design offline or asynchronous tutorials, the Learner and Grade This packages are the best. You can design all kinds of questions and give custom feedback. And I've watched students make the same mistakes over and over through the years, different students, And so with Learner and Grade This, I can watch for particular kinds of mistakes students make and give them tailored feedback. So I can simulate looking over their shoulder and saying, look here at the thing you did wrong. And Posit Cloud is my best friend. It gives students a place to work on a fully configured virtual machine. I can log in and debug their code for them in the middle of the night or when they're there. It's an incredibly useful resource.
I'll just end all of those links, especially Teaching Tech Together. That is like, I don't know, this to me, it's I actually learned how to, I don't want to say I actually learned how to teach from Teaching Tech Together, but it just helped me like understand that some of my instincts were good and some of them were bad. It's just it's a great book. It's online for free. But if you want to support Greg, please buy the paper copy. The last thing I'll add is, so one of the things we've been experimenting with, we call them data snacks. And it's just like using WebR to show people like, hey, this package is cool. This is what you use it for. Like Patchwork. Patchwork is like one of my favorite ones. And that always try to find those packages that just get people, they're like, wow, you can do that? Like, it's just kind of one way we're just trying to kind of spread the joy around. That was not intentional, not an intentional pun. So.
Well, with that segue, I just want to say thank you to the panelists and thank you for those of you who attended today. You are all educators as well, and so I invite you to be gate openers. So no matter how much you know about R, you know more than someone. So be that gate opener, be that person who says, hey, I did something that I'm proud of or excited about. Can I show you? So thank you so much. Have a great rest of your R medicine. And reach out to us, reach out to your panelists, reach out to each other, and build that community of educators. Thanks so much, everybody.